Elena's hand flew to Madame Victoria's mouth the very second the heavy bedroom door began to creak open. "Don't talk," she whispered desperately, her dark eyes wide with terror and determination. "Ma, please don't make a sound." On the other side of that door, separated by mere inches of polished mahogany, Marcus Nelson's voice drifted through the crack with chilling casualness. He was talking on his phone as if discussing the weather, but the words that reached Elena's ears made her blood turn to ice water. "She's 48 years old, no children," Marcus was saying, his tone businesslike and utterly cold. "Her parents died in that car accident 3 years ago. No siblings, no extended family worth mentioning. When she's gone, everything will be mine. The company, all the properties, every single naira. We finish this quietly tonight. No mess, no questions asked." Elena's heart didn't just race. It slammed against her ribcage so violently she could hear the blood rushing in her ears like ocean waves. Beside her, Madame Victoria's manicured fingers clutched Elena's wrist with the desperate grip of someone drowning. The two women stood frozen in the soft amber glow of the hallway light, a scene that would have appeared peaceful to any casual observer. One woman wore an elegant blue lace wrapper, with her signature reading glasses hanging from a delicate gold chain around her neck. Her graying hair still perfectly styled despite the late hour. The other, 23 years younger, was dressed in a simple black and white maid's uniform, her natural hair pulled back neatly, holding a stack of fresh white towels that suddenly felt as heavy as granite stones in her trembling arms. The ornate crystal doorknob turned with a soft, metallic click that echoed like a gunshot in the silence. Marcus took one measured step into the hallway, his expensive Italian leather shoes making barely a whisper on the polished marble floor. Elena stopped breathing entirely. Her lungs felt locked, her chest tight with the kind of fear that comes from knowing death is nearby. Then, just as the door began to swing wider, just as Elena could see the edge of Marcus's shadow stretching across the threshold like a dark omen, he stopped. He laughed into his phone, a sound that was low, bitter, and somehow more terrifying than any scream could have been. "Don't worry about the technical details," he continued, his voice already beginning to fade as his footsteps moved back toward the bedroom's interior. "I've researched this thoroughly over the past several weeks. One small dose dissolved in her evening tea, and it will look exactly like cardiac arrest brought on by chronic stress. After all, everyone in Lagos business circles knows she works 18-hour days, barely sleeps, carries the weight of a multinational corporation on her shoulders alone." His voice took on an almost dreamy quality that made Elena's skin crawl. "The newspapers will practically write themselves, 'Beloved CEO dies from exhaustion at 48. I'll play the part of the grieving widower perfectly. And then—" He paused, and Elena could hear the smile in his voice. "Complete freedom. A new life with a young woman who can give me the sons I've always deserved. This barren woman has given me absolutely nothing but access to money that should have been mine from the very beginning." The phone call ended with a soft electronic beep that seemed to reverberate through the mansion's walls themselves. Silence swelled between the two women like the atmospheric pressure before a devastating thunderstorm, heavy, suffocating, and absolutely full of unspoken horror. Madame Victoria looked at Elena with eyes that seemed to be seeing the world collapse around her. In that single glance, Elena witnessed complete shock washing across the older woman's face, like ice-cold rain against a window. For 28 years, Victoria had built her empire from nothing, transforming a small fabric shop on Lagos Island into a multinational corporation that employed thousands. She had trusted, loved, and shared everything with the man on the other side of that door. And now she had learned that to him, she was nothing more than a financial obstacle to be quietly eliminated. Elena swallowed hard, her throat feeling dry as desert sand. But when she spoke, Her voice remained steady as bedrock, despite her hands shaking like leaves in a hurricane. "Ma," she whispered, forming each word carefully and deliberately. "Please listen to me first. Please don't move. Don't speak. Your life depends on what we do in the next few minutes." And that was precisely how the most terrifying night of their lives began. But to truly understand the full weight of that moment, we must go back to the beginning, to the peaceful morning hours before their world tilted completely off its axis. 8 hours earlier, morning had risen soft and golden over the sprawling metropolis of Lagos, painting the sky in gentle shades of amber and rose. Palm fronds shifted lazily in the light Atlantic breeze that carried the mingled scents of salt water and frying plantains from street vendors already setting up their colorful stalls. The massive white mansion in the exclusive Ikoyi district woke up like a quiet ship preparing for another day's voyage. Wrought iron gates sliding open with mechanical precision, underground sprinkler systems beginning their perfectly choreographed dance across manicured lawns, the industrial-sized kitchen already humming with the comforting aromas of sweet Nigerian tea and freshly baked bread. Elena Adebayo had been awake since exactly 5 o'clock in the morning, just as she had been every single day for the past 3 months. This wasn't unusual for her. She had learned long ago that the secret to survival was to wake up before the rest of the world did, to be ready and prepared before anyone even knew they needed you to be ready. She moved through the mansion's 37 rooms like a gentle wind, her presence felt, but never intrusive or disruptive. She mopped the imported Italian marble floors until they gleamed like perfect mirrors. She rinsed and folded the expensive Egyptian cotton linens with military precision. She checked the elaborate flower arrangements by the Steinway grand piano in the music room, ensuring that each orchid and rose was positioned exactly right. She wiped down the curved glass railings of the spiral staircase that led to the mansion's second floor, removing every fingerprint and dust particle until the surface was absolutely flawless. She made sure the main living room sparkled like a jewelry display window, the marble floors reflecting the morning light like still water, the floor-to-ceiling blue silk curtains hanging neat and smooth without even the smallest wrinkle. She counted the crystal glasses before important business meetings, ensuring there were always 2 extras in case of unexpected guests. She checked the batteries in every remote control, tested every light switch, and noticed when there was even the tiniest scuff mark on the wall in the grand hallway, a mark so small that most people would never see it. But Elena saw everything. Elena did all these things with meticulous, almost obsessive care because she knew, deep in her bones and soul, what it felt like when a home had no peace whatsoever. She understood the crushing weight of chaos, the bone-deep exhaustion of uncertainty, the gnawing fear that came with never knowing if tomorrow would bring shelter or if you would find yourself sleeping on a hall, another cold park bench. Her parents had died when she was 21 years old. First her father, Samuel, succumbing to complications from diabetes because they couldn't afford proper medical care, and then her mother, Grace, following him just 6 months later, as if her heart had simply decided it couldn't continue beating in a world without the love of her life. They had been like 2 candles blown out by the same merciless wind, leaving Elena completely alone in a world that suddenly felt too big, too cold, and too dangerous. Since that terrible year that had changed everything, life had been an endless series of struggles that would have broken someone with less inner strength. One menial job here, lasting perhaps 3 weeks until the small business closed permanently. Another job there, scrubbing floors in a downtown office building until the cleaning contract was terminated without warning. Sometimes she had a narrow bed in a crowded hostel where 6 women shared one tiny room, and you had to hide your few possessions or they would disappear by morning. Sometimes she slept on wooden benches in public gardens, using her jacket as a blanket and praying that the night security guards would be kind enough to let her rest until dawn broke. She had learned to be quiet, quick, and incredibly careful in everything she did. She had learned to make any space feel safe and organized, even when her own life felt like it was held together with nothing but prayer and sheer determination. She had learned to read people's moods from the way they walked, to anticipate their needs before they were even spoken, to become invisible when visibility might mean losing the small jobs that kept her alive. When she finally secured steady work in Madame Victoria's mansion 3 months ago, after weeks of inquiries and interviews, she had stood at those imposing iron gates and made herself a solemn promise. Give this house your absolute best effort. Make it run like a perfectly composed symphony. Prove that you deserve to be here, that you can be trusted with something precious. Madame Victoria Adeyemi was impossible to ignore or forget. At 48 years old, she was the brilliant and innovative billionaire CEO and founder of Victoria Fabrics Limited, the largest textile manufacturing and design company in all of West Africa. Her bold, revolutionary fabric designs hung in shop windows from the bustling street markets of Yaba to the upscale boutiques of Victoria Island, from prestigious fashion houses in London to major department stores in New York City. She was a woman who had built an empire through pure intelligence, relentless work ethic, and an artistic vision that had revolutionized how the world saw African fashion. In business matters, Madame Victoria was firm but scrupulously fair in all her dealings. She demanded absolute excellence from everyone around her, but she also recognized and generously rewarded that excellence when she encountered it. When Elena completed her daily tasks with particular care and attention to detail, Madame Victoria would pause in her incredibly busy schedule to say things like, "Thank you, Elena. I noticed how perfectly you arranged those files." Or, "The flowers you chose for the conference room created exactly the right atmosphere for our meeting." These small acknowledgments meant more to Elena than any paycheck could ever mean. They were proof that she was seen, valued, and appreciated as a human being rather than just another piece of household equipment. Madame Victoria often wore blue lace. It had become her signature look in business and social circles, and she habitually kept her reading glasses hanging low on a delicate gold chain when she worked through the endless stacks of documents and contracts that crossed her massive mahogany desk every day. Sometimes, when particularly challenging business deals kept her working until 10 or 11 o'clock at night, she would call Elena into her private study. Instead of simply dismissing the young woman back to the servants' quarters, she would gesture toward the comfortable leather chair across from her desk and say, "Sit with me for a few minutes, Elena. Let me make you some tea as well." Those quiet evening conversations became absolutely precious to both women, though neither would have admitted it at the time. They would sit at the big conference table beside the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the beautifully landscaped gardens, sipping Earl Grey tea from delicate bone china cups, and they would talk about books they had read recently, the distinctive sound Lagos traffic made after evening rain, the way certain colors could completely change a person's entire mood, or the ongoing challenge of creating beauty in a world that often seemed determined to remain ugly. "Your hands are extraordinarily careful," Madame Victoria had observed one evening, watching Elena arrange fresh white roses in a crystal vase with the precision and artistry of a master craftsman. "Careful hands save a home from breaking apart at the seams." Elena had smiled, one of her rare, genuinely happy smiles that transformed her entire face. "Careful eyes are important too, Ma. You have to see the small problems before they become big disasters." It was honestly a good life, better than anything Elena had dared to hope for in many years. The work was dignified, the pay was generous, and she was treated with consistent respect and kindness. But there was one shadow that moved through the mansion's otherwise bright and welcoming spaces like a cloud blocking the sun. One presence that made Elena's carefully developed survival instincts whisper warnings she couldn't quite articulate. Marcus Nelson was 55 years old, tall and undeniably handsome in the particular way that some men remain magnetically attractive well into middle age. His salt and pepper hair was always perfectly styled by expensive barbers. His clothes were expertly tailored by the finest shops in Lagos and London, and he possessed the kind of confident, charming smile that could win over investors, board members, and society photographers with equal ease. But Elena noticed, and her survival had always depended on noticing things that others missed, that his smile never quite reached his eyes. There was something cold and calculating behind that handsome facade, something predatory that made her skin crawl whenever he looked at her too long or spoke to her in that particular condescending tone he reserved for people he considered far beneath his social station. Marcus didn't work, and he didn't have to work. He had married into tremendous wealth and comfort, and he seemed to view this as his natural birthright rather than an extraordinary gift that should inspire gratitude. He flew regularly on Madame Victoria's private jet to business conferences and social events, where he would charm potential clients and partners with practiced ease. He drove her collection of luxury automobiles, the Bentley, the Mercedes, the BMW, as if they were expensive toys provided purely for his entertainment and pleasure. But in the quiet corners of the mansion, when he thought no one was watching or listening carefully, his practiced charm felt sharp and false. He would toss his expensive Italian shoes carelessly in the middle of the pristine living room and simply leave them there for Elena or other staff members to step around and eventually move. When Madame Victoria was traveling for important business, he would bring home drinking companions, loud, boisterous men who would laugh too loudly and leave sticky messes in the spotless kitchen that took hours to properly clean. Elena didn't judge. It wasn't her place to judge the personal dynamics of her employer's marriage. But she watched everything with the keen attention of someone whose life had depended on reading people accurately. She noticed that Marcus never asked Madame Victoria about her day when she came home exhausted from 14-hour work sessions. She noticed the way he would roll his eyes dismissively when Madame Victoria took urgent business calls during their dinner together. She noticed how he would disappear for hours at a time without any explanation and return smelling like expensive women's perfume that definitely wasn't his wife's signature scent. Most heartbreaking of all, Elena noticed the profoundly sad way Madame Victoria's gaze would sometimes linger on a small wooden cradle that sat behind protective glass in a special display cabinet in the main hallway. It was hand-carved from the finest African mahogany, decorated with delicate brass fittings that had been polished to a mirror shine, and lined with the softest white silk that money could buy. It was a cradle that had been lovingly prepared years ago with such hope and anticipation, a cradle that represented dreams of family and motherhood that had never been fulfilled despite the best medical care that unlimited money could provide, a cradle that had never held the weight of a sleeping child. That particular afternoon, as if the universe itself was preparing for the terrible revelation that would shatter their peaceful world, a massive storm system began gathering over the sprawling city of Lagos. The sky transformed gradually from bright tropical blue to an ominous steel gray that seemed to press down on the city like a heavy blanket. The first rumbles of thunder sounded like distant war drums announcing the approach of an invisible army, and the air became thick and oppressive, charged with the kind of electrical energy that made people's skin feel tight and their nerves feel frayed and on edge. Elena finished her thorough cleaning of the expansive living room and began heading toward Madame Victoria's private bedroom suite to change the imported silk sheets and carefully wipe down the antique side tables with their precious family photographs and expensive decorative objects. As she approached the doorway, walking as quietly as always in her soft-soled work shoes, she heard something that stopped her completely dead in her tracks. It was Marcus's voice, but this wasn't the charming, publicly acceptable version of his voice that everyone else in Lagos society knew and respected. This voice was different, harder, colder, filled with a venom and hatred so intense it made Elena's blood seem to freeze in her veins like water turning to ice. "I told you we're absolutely finished waiting," he was saying into his phone with barely controlled rage that suggested this conversation had been building toward explosion for quite some time. I can't and won't spend the rest of my life pretending to love a barren woman who will never, ever give me the sons I deserve and have always wanted. She's 48 years old. Her biological clock stopped ticking years ago. Time is running out for both of us, but especially for me. Elena froze so completely that she might have been carved from stone. Every survival instinct she had developed during her years of poverty and uncertainty stood up inside her consciousness like soldiers snapping to attention. She didn't gasp in shock. She didn't drop the clean towels. She didn't whisper, "Oh my God," like her terrified heart desperately wanted to do. Instead, she became absolutely invisible, completely silent, and deadly focused on gathering every piece of information she could. "Her parents died 3 years ago in that automobile accident," Marcus continued, his voice growing steadily more confident and businesslike with each terrible word. "She has no siblings, no cousins worth mentioning, no extended family members who would ask difficult questions or demand detailed explanations. When she dies, when we make her die, I inherit everything automatically under Nigerian law. We're talking about close to 2 billion naira in liquid assets alone, plus extensive properties in Lagos, Abuja, London, and New York. The company, the investment portfolios, the offshore accounts, the art collection, the jewelry, everything becomes mine." Behind Elena, she could hear the soft, familiar sound of high heels clicking against marble and catch the gentle drift of Madame Victoria's signature perfume, that subtle, expensive blend of jasmine and sandalwood that had become as much a part of her identity as her blue lace dresses. Madame Victoria was walking toward her bedroom, probably carrying her reading glasses and a thick folder full of contracts that needed to be reviewed before tomorrow morning's crucial board meeting. She was approaching her private space and her husband completely unaware that she was walking directly into the presence of a man who was actively planning her murder. Elena moved faster than fear itself, faster than rational thought, faster than the voice in her head that was screaming warnings and alarms. She spun around with fluid grace and stepped directly in front of Madame Victoria, gently but firmly placing the stack of clean towels on a nearby antique console table. Then, with infinite care and tenderness, she pressed her hand softly over Madame Victoria's mouth, her palm covering those lips that had given thousands of business presentations and commanded respect in boardrooms across 3 continents. "Don't talk," she whispered, her voice no more than the faintest breath of sound, barely audible even inches away. "Ma, please, please listen to me with everything you have. Your life depends on absolute silence right now." For one heart-stopping moment that seemed to stretch into eternity, Madame Victoria stared at Elena in complete and utter shock. Her eyes went wide with confusion, surprise, and the beginnings of anger. How dare her maid touch her without permission? How dare she prevent her from entering her own bedroom? How dare she place her hand over her mouth like she was a child who needed to be silenced? But something in Elena's eyes, something desperate and brilliant and utterly sincere, cut through the initial outrage and made Madame Victoria recognize that this was not insubordination or disrespect. This was not the action of a servant who had forgotten her place. This was someone trying to save her life, and every instinct Victoria had developed during 3 decades of navigating dangerous business waters told her to trust this young woman who had never given her a moment's cause for doubt. Through the partially open bedroom door, Marcus's voice continued with growing enthusiasm, each word falling into the silence like stones being dropped into a deep, dark well. "Yes, I have the supplier's contact information, and I've confirmed that he's completely reliable and discreet," Marcus was saying, and there was something almost cheerful in his tone now, as if he were discussing vacation plans rather than premeditated murder. One small dose of the compound dissolved in her evening tea. She always has that cup of chamomile tea before bed, never varies from that routine, and everything will look completely natural and expected. She'll simply go to sleep in her own bed and never wake up again. The autopsy will show cardiac arrest brought on by chronic stress and exhaustion. Nothing more suspicious than that. Elena watched with growing horror as understanding dawned across Madame Victoria's face like the sun rising over a landscape of devastation. First came confusion as her mind tried to process what she was hearing. Then came recognition as the meaning of the words became crystal clear. Finally came a pain so deep and profound that it made her shoulders sag, as if someone had suddenly placed an enormous crushing weight across them. This was the man she had loved with all her heart for 8 years. The man she had married in a ceremony that had been featured on the front pages of 3 different newspapers and covered by television stations across West Africa. The man who had flown on her private jet to romantic getaways, who had lived in her mansion and eaten food she provided, who had worn clothes and jewelry she had bought him, who had access to bank accounts that represented the work of her entire adult life. This was the man she had chosen to love and trust, even when well-meaning friends and business associates had quietly questioned whether he truly loved her for herself or simply for the financial security and social status that came with being married to one of Nigeria's most successful entrepreneurs. This was the man she had defended when people whispered about his unemployment and his expensive tastes and his obvious enjoyment of a lifestyle he had never worked to earn. "I want complete freedom," Marcus continued, and now his voice carried a dreamy, almost euphoric quality that was somehow more chilling than his earlier anger had been. "I want to start a new life with a woman young enough to give me the sons I've always deserved to have. I want to travel the world without having to pretend that I'm proud of a wife who cares more about her precious fabric patterns and business meetings than she does about making me happy and fulfilled." His voice became harder, more bitter. "This barren woman has given me absolutely nothing except access to money that should have been mine from the very beginning. Egged at years of my life wasted on someone who couldn't even perform the most basic function of a wife, giving her husband children to carry on his name and legacy." Elena felt Madame Victoria begin to tremble like a leaf caught in a powerful wind, and she gently, carefully took the older woman's hand in both of hers, holding it with the same tenderness she might show to an injured bird. Moving her lips with exaggerated precision and making no sound whatsoever, she mouthed the words, "Ma, we need to call the police right now, this very second." Madame Victoria's eyes filled with tears that threatened to spill over and run down her cheeks, but she nodded with the quiet dignity of a woman who had survived countless business challenges and boardroom battles and would somehow find the strength to survive this ultimate betrayal as well. Like 2 dancers performing a routine where the slightest misstep could mean death, the 2 women moved silently away from the bedroom door, down the hallway past priceless artwork and family photographs, through the formal sitting area with its antique furniture and Persian rugs, and into Madame Victoria's small but comfortable private study. Elena closed the study door with infinite care, ensuring it made not even the smallest sound that might alert Marcus to their location. Her hands were shaking as if she had developed a sudden fever, but her mind remained completely clear and focused on the immediate task of survival. Madame Victoria's fingers trembled so violently she could barely hold her phone steady as she dialed the emergency services number. "Lagos State Emergency Services," she whispered, when a professional voice answered on the second ring. "Please send help to my location immediately. My husband is planning to poison me tonight. I need police protection right now before he has a chance to act on his plan." The emergency operator, C, lurely trained for exactly this type of crisis, asked rapid-fire questions designed to gather the most crucial information as quickly as possible. Madame Victoria answered in short, careful words, glancing frequently at Elena, as if the younger woman had become her anchor in a world that was suddenly spinning completely out of control. "What is your exact location, ma'am?" "This is Victoria Adeyemi, number 15 Kingsway Road, Ikoyi District, the large white mansion behind the tall iron gates. Can you confirm the specific nature of the threat you're facing?" My husband is planning to poison my evening tea tonight with something that will make my death look like natural cardiac arrest. I overheard him making final arrangements on the phone just minutes ago. He wants to inherit my business empire. Are you in immediate physical danger at this very moment? I don't think he knows that I know about his plan, but I can't be completely certain. He could discover us at any time. Emergency units are being dispatched to your location immediately, Mrs. Adeyemi. Please stay on the line with me and do not hang up. Do not confront your husband under any circumstances. Is there a safe room in your home where you can secure the door? Yes. I'm in my private study with Elena. She's my employee, the one who overheard the conversation and warned me. She's the reason I'm still alive. Elena felt a strange, warm sensation spread through her chest at being acknowledged so directly, at being recognized as something more than just another piece of household equipment. But there was no time to process or enjoy that feeling, because the mansion itself seemed to be holding its breath, waiting with supernatural awareness for whatever would happen next. The house felt like fragile crystal that might shatter at the slightest vibration. The enormous crystal chandelier in the main living room gave a tiny, almost inaudible musical sound as if one piece had brushed against another in a breeze that no human could feel. Outside the study window, the storm that had been gathering all afternoon finally cracked open like a massive egg, and rain began falling in heavy drops that sounded like drum beats against the expensive glass. Then, after what felt like several lifetimes but was probably only 12 or 13 minutes, the footsteps returned. Marcus had finished his murderous phone conversation and was leaving the bedroom, walking into the main hallway with the confident, relaxed stride of a man who believed his plan was absolutely perfect and completely undetectable. His expensive leather shoes tapped against the polished marble floor in a rhythm that actually sounded almost musical, and there was an unmistakable lightness in his step that suggested he was feeling genuinely pleased with himself and his arrangements. He was humming softly under his breath. Elena recognized the melody as something from a popular American movie soundtrack, and the casual, cheerful nature of that humming was somehow more terrifying than any angry shouting could have been. He was walking directly toward the study now, getting closer with each passing second. Elena could hear his approach like distant thunder gradually getting nearer during a storm, and she knew that within moments he would reach the door and discover them. The study door handle turned with a soft, metallic click that seemed unnaturally loud in the charged atmosphere. Elena glanced quickly toward the tall windows that faced the street, and in the distance, growing steadily louder and more distinct, she could hear something that made her heart leap with desperate hope. Sirens. They were faint at first, like the sound of wind through trees, but growing stronger and clearer by the second, weaving through the rain-soaked streets of Ikoyi like silver snakes racing toward their destination. Marcus smiled his most charming smile as he pushed open the study door and stepped confidently into the room, his eyes automatically sweeping the familiar space before landing on the two women. There was his wife, sitting in her usual leather chair behind the massive desk, looking pale and shaken but trying to maintain her composure. And there was the maid, standing slightly in front of her like a young tree that had somehow grown in such a way that it provided shelter from harsh weather. "Well, what's this?" Marcus asked, his voice carrying that smooth, pleasant tone that had charmed hundreds of business associates and society photographers over the years. There was just a hint of curiosity in his words, the kind of natural interest any husband might show when discovering his wife having an unexpected private conversation. "A secret meeting that I wasn't invited to join? Are you two ladies planning next week's household schedule or perhaps discussing some changes to the staff arrangements?" Elena lifted her chin and met his eyes directly and steadily, something she had never, ever done during the 3 months she had worked in this house. She saw him notice this small but significant act of defiance, saw his eyebrows rise slightly in surprise, and perhaps the beginnings of suspicion. Madame Victoria held her phone tightly in her right hand, and Elena could see that the older woman's knuckles were white with the tension of gripping it so hard. The sirens were much, much louder now. Elena could hear the distinctive sound of heavy emergency vehicles turning through the mansion's front gates, could hear car doors slamming with authority, could hear the sound of multiple pairs of boots hitting wet stone pavement, could hear voices calling out instructions and coordinates to each other with the crisp efficiency of trained professionals responding to a crisis. Marcus's confident, charming smile flickered and wavered like a candle flame in a strong wind. His head tilted slightly to one side as he registered the approaching sounds of sirens and emergency vehicles. And Elena saw the exact moment when realization dawned in his eyes. The terrible, crushing understanding that something had gone catastrophically, irreversibly wrong with his carefully planned evening of murder. Elena took one deep, steadying breath, drawing on every single ounce of inner strength and courage she had developed during her years of surviving on Lagos's unforgiving streets, and said with the calm, unshakable dignity of someone who had scrubbed floors and survived storms and refused to be intimidated by anyone, "Ma, please step back and stand behind me."